Moscow has faced a drag on its economy since the start of the year amid falling energy sales and high war spending. But that picture has shifted sharply. US and Israeli strikes on Iran, along with the closure of the Strait of Hormuz, have pushed oil prices higher.
Washington has also issued a 30-day waiver allowing India to keep buying Russian oil to steady global markets. The analysts say a prolonged crisis could play to Russia's advantage. We are joined now by Angela Stent. She's a senior fellow at American Enterprise Institute for more. Professor Stent, thank you very much for joining us. So it seems like many analysts believe the biggest winner of the Iran war may be Vladimir Putin. I mean, do you agree that Moscow has gained the most strategically from this conflict so far?
So certainly in the short term, I think Russia's won the lottery, literally. Its oil revenues had gone down by about 30% in the last month or so. It was straining domestically. Its economy was under a lot of stress. And now you have high oil prices. You have India, as you just reported, going back and purchasing Russian oil in large amounts after agreeing with President Trump that it wouldn't do that as a condition for the U.S. removing tariffs. And Russia can appear to be, the winner here, and in fact taunting the Europeans, saying to them, well, you made a mistake by trying to wean yourself off our oil and gas. So, as I say, in the short term, and then the other reason why this looks very good for Russia is because the amount of Patriot weapons and air defenses that are being used by the U.S. in this war means that there's much less for Ukraine. The Europeans were in a program to buy these weapons from the United States and then loan them, give them on loan to Ukraine. And so that's meant that for Ukraine, the outlook for the next few weeks, as long as this war goes on, and with an insufficient supply of weapons, is really quite grim.
Professor, I'm wondering whether you see this being sustained in the medium and longer term, though. I mean, yes, we have the higher oil prices, but we also know that Russia's partners, if you like, in the Middle East are busy right now. China has a stake as a partner, but doesn't seem to be too interested. We know what's happening in Venezuela and Cuba. Will Russia be able to take this into the medium and long term, you think?
No, I think in the medium and long term, the outlook isn't so good for Russia because you said it lost it hasn't lost Venezuela, but certainly has diminished influence there and diminished oil revenues with Maduro gone. Before all this happened, obviously, you had the fall of Assad in Syria. You now have the elimination, at least, of the supreme leader from Iran. Of course, his son is supposed to take over. So in the longer run, Russia's resources for exerting its influence in this region, in the Middle East, for instance, are limited as long as it continues this war of attrition against Ukraine, going through munitions at a very high rate, and of course losing large numbers of soldiers every week. So I think this is maybe a temporary blip for Russia, but in the meantime, it will recoup these earnings from oil, and therefore it will be able to continue to prosecute this war maybe longer than it would have had this war not happened.
On your point on the Ukraine war, Professor, just how significant is this moment for Moscow's ability to sustain this war with Ukraine? And could it shift the battlefield balance in Russia's favor?
I think not immediately. In fact, the Ukrainians have made quite a few territorial gains in the last few weeks, maybe not completely noticed by the international press. But in the short term, certainly, it will help Russia also in terms of the Russian economy, where you have high inflation, you have food shortages in some areas. They felt the stress of all of this. So that will alleviate maybe some of their economic problems at home immediately. And also, with this war going on, it kind of distracts attention away from the war. There were supposed to be trilateral negotiations last week. They didn't take place. There maybe are going to be some next week, but they clearly aren't going to be in the UAE. So it means that there will be less attention paid to trying to find a negotiated settlement to this war.
Understood. I also want to ask you, Professor Stent, about what the IEA and the U.S. is doing in terms of releasing oil into the market. Is that something that will come into play, though, and perhaps reduce the potential revenue benefit to Moscow?
Well, I think it's a question of timing, though. So immediately now, with high oil prices and the lifting of sanctions on India and possibly other sanctions, I believe in the telephone call that President Trump and Putin had a couple of days ago, there was talk of lifting other sanctions, although I haven't seen any evidence that that's actually happened. I think for the time being, Russia will enjoy the moment of these high oil prices. But of course, if more oil is released onto the market and that does depress the price, and that's clearly what President Trump and the G7 countries would like to happen, then again, the benefits will begin to diminish for Russia.
Okay, so if the Iran conflict drags on, Professor, who ultimately bears the greatest cost, do you think? Is it the U.S., Europe, Ukraine, or the Middle East itself?
Well, I think all of those countries that you mentioned will bear some of the cost of it. Clearly, in the Middle East, with what's happened to the various Gulf states, what's happening now, Europe, in terms of very high oil prices, and having agreed that they're not going to start purchasing Russian hydrocarbons again, they will, and the United States is going to bear the cost of this too. I mean, it's more than just the oil prices; it's supply chains, it's whatever happens in the Straits of Hormuz. So I don't really see any country in the medium term coming out of this as a great winner. And obviously, you'll have a new leadership in Iran, but you won't have regime change in Iran, which may never have been the goal of the United States. But it's also not been clear. The goalposts have shifted in terms of what the U.S. administration has said about this.
Meantime, Professor, CNN reporting that Russia helping Iran with drone tactics. And I'm wondering whether Washington could potentially see this as a hostile act that directly endangers its forces. And will that have any, I suppose, impact on how Trump approaches negotiations and relations with Putin?
Well, President Trump was asked about this yesterday, about the fact that there was proof that the Russians were sharing intelligence with the Iranians that were enabling them to target American targets, American personnel as well. And he kind of brushed it aside. But more evidence has come out that it's not only the intelligence sharing about the positioning of U.S. assets, if you like, but also with the drone technology and how to operate all of these drones, given Russia's own experience in Ukraine. And so I think it should concern the Trump administration. We know that there was a phone conversation at the U.S. instigation between Presidents Trump and Putin. We don't really know what was discussed there. The Russians have just said, it was frank and constructive. One would assume that this must have come up. But we should also remember that the Ukrainians are now helping out a number of the Gulf states, and in fact have offered their help to the United States because they have a lot of experience in countering the Shaheds, these drones that are being lobbed at, particularly some of the Gulf states. And the Ukrainians are hoping to gain something by this. But I think the Trump administration is going to have to look more seriously at the evidence of exactly what it is the Russians are doing to facilitate Iran's bombing campaign.
All right, Professor Stent, we'll have to leave it there for now, but thank you very much for your time and your insights this morning. Okay. Angela Stent, a senior fellow at American Enterprise Institute.